What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today I have another video for you, and this one is going to be regarding rosters and roster adjustments that I think that you guys should make in your franchise modes. And these aren't going to be specific to your team, specific to, specifically your franchise. This is going to be for an overarching change for franchise mode and the overall rosters for your teams in your franchise mode. So I wanted to go ahead and give you guys 5 just major changes that will help with realism in your franchise modes. Yep, okay. Just need to make sure that audio was coming out because I was having some issues before. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the 5 changes that we usually make in our franchise modes in order to achieve better realism. And these are things that you might have to keep up with over time. They could be a one-time change, but let's get into the 5 different things that I recommend for you guys. Now, the number one thing that I recommend for you guys is a seasonal roster update. And I've mentioned this many other times throughout my franchises, throughout my videos and things like that, and that is on a seasonal basis. Once the Super Bowl is done and over with, whether you choose to do it one way or another way, I'll mention a couple ways of doing this, you give yourself a bit of a roster overhaul at the end of each season. So you look at the player performances in your franchises, you get everybody on board in your franchises, and at the end of the season you decide, we are going to adjust overalls based on player performance. We are essentially going to do what EA does, and every single season in your franchise, create the roster from scratch based off of performance, based off past performance, all of those different factors that you want to include in there. Now, there are different ways that you can do this. You can do a total roster overhaul where you go through every single team, every single player, and you adjust based on their performances and things like that. A way that I've found to pare that down, if you don't want to do that amount of workload, I personally take on that workload, and I do that for all of my franchises. I do it based on performance. I get other people's opinions to agree on things, underperformers, overperformers, all that different stuff. You guys, if you don't want to do that much work, you can have all of the teams in the league have 2 top performers and 2 bottom performers that you adjust. So let's say, I'm the Dolphins, for example. Let's say my halfback, Miles Pryor, has an amazing season. Well, maybe we consider bumping him up to an even higher overall because he's one of the top backs in the league. And EA, if you came into Madden 22 or whatever, the best halfback in the league would probably have a 90+ overall rating. It would be adjusted from where they came in at, other than just the in-game progression system. So you guys could do a top 2 players, bottom 2 players, adjust for every single team. You could do 1 player on each team. You could go into the stats for the teams specifically, and this is a way that we like to do it. You go to the stats for the teams and you go to the overall league stats and you say, okay, well, who were the best players in the league? Who were the worst players in the league? Best quarterback in the league was Mikael Cunningham, so maybe he should be a little bit higher overall, or maybe Jaden Daniels, considering his 45 touchdowns and 5 ints. Okay, well, who threw the most interceptions? Traquandre Lewis. Okay, so well, maybe we should consider adjusting down his accuracies or his awareness or something of that nature. Which offensive lineman, for example, gave up the most sacks in the season? Okay, Dion Dawkins. Maybe we should consider taking him down from a 76 overall and reducing his pass blocking a little bit. Or Mike McGlinchey, who's supposed to be a really good offensive lineman, gave up the second most sacks. Maybe he shouldn't be an 89 overall superstar. And so every single season in our franchises, we go through every single team and we adjust their ratings based on how they performed. And it's not going to be, you don't have to do it drastic. You could do it a couple overall points, a couple stats here and there, a couple ratings here and there, whatever it might be. But I highly recommend that you guys do seasonal changes to your rosters. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you end up with everybody having a 99 overall roster because nobody's ever reduced for playing poorly. Like Mike McGlinchey, for example, if that guy gave up 13 sacks in the real NFL season and then we went into the next Madden, there's no way he would keep an 89 overall superstar rating. He would be down in like the 70s. And that's just how Madden works. That's how EA works. And so, I recommend that you guys do that from your own perspective and evaluate those things. That's my number 1 tip. And all of the rest of these kind of fall under that. But they're not necessarily seasonal changes. So the number 2 change that I think is really important because, if you want to promote realism in your franchises, everybody wants to go for the speed players, the speed receivers, whatever it might be. So whenever whenever we do our franchises to start out the entire year, what we do is for the players that are like super fast, you know, like John Ross type players and things like that. I guess we don't really have too many. You know, let's say we look at John Ross, for example, 96 speed. You're going to have to really build up that player in our type of league to get them to a point where they could be like this, like an 84 overall superstar. I mean, you're really going to have to work on those players. So what we do with those players is we go in and take their catching stats down. So John Ross has been in the league for 5 seasons now, and just now is getting into the 80s in catching because he has been playing well. And so we start off with all of the high-speed wide receivers having really low catching stats. Not all of them, because some of them are really good at catching. You know, you look at guys like, you know, DJ Chark and, you know, Marquise Brown, Curtis Samuel, Henry Ruggs, they have decent hands, so you don't have to nuke their catching ratings completely. But guys like John Ross that have proven in the league that they can't catch the football, or, you know, they can't do much else other than run in a straight line, we recommend that you take down those other ratings so that people aren't just going for those speed players because they're just as good as everybody else and they have better speed. That is one of the most important changes, and I think a lot of the changes that we make focus around speed and balancing things out, because we don't just want everybody in the league having the fastest players and abusing the fact that speed kills in Madden. We want realism, and so realistically speaking, those speed receivers aren't as good usually at catching the football. So that is one huge change that I recommend for you guys. The next one that I recommend for you guys, and I know a lot of people will probably disagree with this, but if you want a realistic league, we reduced the speed for a lot of linebackers. We reduced the speed threshold. So whenever we started out the league, we took all of the linebackers except for like Isaiah Simmons, because he's basically a defensive back, and we put them below 90. And so some of them have worked their way back up past 90. But generally speaking, you have to understand that in real life, even the fastest linebackers can't run stride for stride with a wide receiver. I mean, Devin Bush is one of the fastest linebackers in the league, and he still can't keep up with wide receivers sometimes. You know, you guys might look at Devin White, the middle linebacker for the Buccaneers. Yeah, he does a really good job in coverage. You know, he can run with some receivers, but a lot of the faster receivers in the league, he's not going to be able to run with them. And so generally speaking, for all of the linebackers in the league, we try to reduce the overall speed threshold for them because we don't want those unrealistic linebackers. And you can even go as far as to reduce their athleticism, you know, take down their agility and change the direction ratings and things like that. This is just something that we do that I recommend for you guys, because it will get a lot more realistic for you guys. Because generally speaking, in the NFL, yes, you are going to have fast linebackers. There are that type of player nowadays, but they are still not up to the caliber of running with a wide receiver. They're not up to the caliber of being constantly all over the field. Some of the linebackers in the league are, but generally speaking, linebackers should be a bit slower than everybody else and a bit less athletic than everybody else. You don't want a bunch of defensive backs essentially running around at the linebacker position. And so I highly recommend that you guys go in and review your speed ratings. You know, kind of what my general basis for it is like the fastest linebackers should have like 88 speed, because that's like kind of slot cornerback speed, some of the slot cornerbacks in the NFL. And, you know, from there they go down, you know, 88, 87. Maybe the fastest guys have like 89. And I would say, like I had mentioned, you know, I would personally give, to start out the league, I would personally give Isaiah Simmons like 90 speed, you know, like base cornerback speed to start out. That's kind of the best way to go about it. And you guys can keep up with these things if you want, adjust them as you go, whatever it might be. But I highly recommend that you guys at least take a look at the athleticism for linebackers and make some adjustments, because whenever you have a league like this, and like we're 5 seasons in and we're considering making some more adjustments now, when you have a league like this where all of the linebackers are as fast as cornerbacks, it just makes things play way less realistic. And so that is one thing that I highly recommend you guys take a look at. The next thing, moving on to point number 4, this one is huge for me. And, you know, I've talked about it in so many videos about how they don't give dev trait development challenges to offensive linemen. linemen. There's already not enough good offensive linemen in the league, and they don't give the linemen the respect that they deserve. This is something that I recommend you guys do at the start of your league, and something that I recommend that you guys keep up with as your league progresses, is giving your offensive linemen proper development traits. You know, at least giving the guys that are like above an 80, giving them star, because Madden makes so many of these guys that are star offensive linemen or superstar offensive linemen, they make them normal players, and they can't get better. They kind of stay where they're at. Sometimes they fall off and things like that, especially if they're older. If a guy's older and he has normal development, he's going to go down a lot faster. And so I highly recommend that you guys review the offensive line and give at least the top players superstar, and then a lot of the players below them star. You know, guys that are in the mid 80s, they should have star development, because those are the best linemen in the league, and they should kind of match up with the other positions. I don't know why EA takes the stance that they take with offensive linemen, but they make it impossible for them to earn dev upgrades. So you should hand some of those out yourself if an offensive lineman is playing really good. And this goes back to reviewing players' stats. So, for example, you know, if I go back and take a look at the Steelers, where we were, you know, playing that franchise, if I take a look at their offensive line, you know, Chukwuma Okorafor started out as a normal development player, but he had like 3 straight seasons at left tackle of not giving up a sack. Well, if you play 3 entire seasons as a starting left tackle in the NFL, you should probably be considered like a star player or a superstar player. So we gave him star development after 2 or 3 seasons of proving that he's that good. And so that's not something that the Madden system would do, and that is something that I highly recommend that you guys look into doing for your teams, because, and your franchises in general, because it, you know, I just don't understand why they overlook offensive linemen quite the way that they do, because that's problematic to me, because offensive line is one of the most important positions in the game of football and in Madden itself, you know. So, you know, overlooking that position and not giving it the proper respect and attention that it deserves creates unrealistic results in your franchises. So I highly recommend you guys take a look at that. And then the final one that I strongly like to emphasize to people is taking a look at your league's halfbacks and cornerbacks, because there are a lot of halfbacks and cornerbacks that they kind of just disrespect in terms of, like what their overall speed is. So let me go look at halfbacks, for example. So a lot of the slower running backs in the league, they'll give like 87 speed to, which I understand where they're coming from in terms of like 87 speed. But it makes them really ineffective to actually run the football, especially if you're in a league that has CPU players. Like, let's say Josh Jacobs, for example, was a CPU player. He starts out in Madden with like 86 or 87 speed. However, he's a fantastic running back in real life. The problem is that because speed matters so much in Madden, Josh Jacobs with like 86 speed, controlled by a CPU team, gets stuffed every single time he runs the football because he's so slow. So I highly recommend, and this goes for cornerbacks too, I highly recommend that for your halfbacks, especially the slower halfbacks, the Josh Jacobs, I don't know who else we might consider, like James Conner, Singletary is one of them that they always kind of give really low speed to. Alexander Mattinson, I think, is on that list. We're pretty far into the league here, and some of these guys have gotten a lot of upgrades, but I recommend that you guys give like the slower running backs 88 or 89 speed. Like, that's where running back speed should start out at, because you will still notice that they're slower than everybody else, but it doesn't make them completely ineffective. So like, my best example for you guys there is Josh Jacobs. With that super low speed, it really makes him play unrealistic, and so you should consider bumping Josh Jacobs' speed up to like an 88 or 89, because that's going to result in much more realistic play. And then, like I said, the same thing happens for defensive backs. There are a lot of really good defensive backs that are considered like slot cornerbacks and things like that they give 88 speed to or 87 speed to. Desmond King is one that I think they give like 87 speed to, so we gave him a bump up to 88, for example. There are various other players, I think, that a lot of them have probably retired from this league at this point. Mike Hilton is an example. I know that for the Steelers, they always give him like 87 speed, which is just simply not equivalent to what that player actually does in real life. Like, I understand Mike Hilton and guys like that are not the fastest corners in real life. I understand that they're not going to run man for man with a lot of the receivers in the league, but they also don't play like slower than a linebacker. And so these are two of the positions that I wanted to point out to you guys the most that could require some attention. And so the lowest speed that we give to any halfback or cornerback, unless they are like legitimately like a slow player, is like 88. That's like the bottom of the threshold to make a player actually viable in Madden. So highly recommend that you guys take a look at that. And I know that I've said that like 9 times now. I apologize that I keep saying the same thing, but like these things are really important for franchise mode if you want realistic gameplay. You know, having players that are actually good, like Mike Hilton is a good slot corner. He does a lot of things really well. He can get to the quarterback off the edge. He can keep up with guys from time to time whenever he is in coverage against them. It's not like he's super slow, but having him have 87 speed will make him be almost completely ineffective in Madden. And so you have to give these guys a little bit of a speed bump in order to make them competitive with the rest of the players in the league. So like I said, recommend that you guys take a look at, you know, especially the halfback and the cornerback position. Those are positions that I have identified as extremely kind of overlooked and misvalued and misattributed by EA. And then, you know, in addition to that, we also mentioned you guys should review offensive line, especially with them not being able to earn development upgrades. You guys should continually review offensive line, in my opinion, something that would be really helpful for your leagues. Like I said, you should do a seasonal roster update. If you want realism, I find that that is the best way to achieve it. And if you tell people when they come into your league to start your league that this is what we're doing on a seasonal basis, you know, if you have the opportunity for your players to get upgrades if they play better, and if they play really poorly, then they can get downgraded. You know, if you can get guys in agreement on that ahead of time, then it's the best way to go about things, in my opinion. And then in addition to that, I recommend that you guys check out Linebacker Speed, and at least at the start of your franchises kind of reduce Linebacker Speed, because, you know, Devin Bush, when we started off this franchise, had 88 speed, I think, or 88 or 89. So you have to think about how many speed upgrades that these guys can actually get, which is absolutely insane. Like Devin Bush up to 92 speed is ridiculous. So imagine if these guys start out with 90 and 91 speed. These guys are going to be like 95 speed players, and they're going to be faster than most wide receivers in the game. That's where things get problematic. So like I said, review linebackers. That's one that I recommend. And the final thing that I recommend is, you know, reduce the catching rating of some of those super speedy wide receivers that aren't really that good, because I know a lot of guys will jump into a franchise and they like to try to get John Ross or Marquise Goodwin and guys like that just have burner speed, and they can use them effectively. And the problem with that is those guys aren't really good route runners. They aren't really good at catching the football. And so if you can reduce those things, you can make it less viable for somebody to just come in, trade for all the speed players or sign all the speed players and then do well with them. So those are my 5 tips, my 5 roster fixes or 5 roster adjustments that I think you guys should consider for realism in your franchise modes in Madden. Let me know in the comment section if you guys have any more that you guys like to look at. I just wanted to highlight my top 5. Like I said, we go through every position, every player, and we heavily edit our rosters to be as realistic as possible based on their performance, based on their past performance, based on, you know, Pro Football Focus grades, based on expert analysis and opinions and things that we find online. So there is a lot of effort that goes into making our rosters the way that they are and achieving realistic gameplay as you see it on the channel. You know, probably most predominantly with the RDFL league, considering that's a 32 user league, and a lot of those games are very close games, very realistic games. So, you know, if you guys want some of that realism, I recommend doing these things. Hopefully this video is helpful to you guys. If this video did help you guys out, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're new, and comment down below your thoughts on these topics. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys have a good night.